Namaste and Jai Swaminarayan. I am Yogesh Patel and welcome to Windows into Wisdom, a series on the BAPS Better Living channel, where ancient yet timeless wisdom meets modern day life. In the early 1800s, Bhagwan Swaminarayan initiated Swamis who, instead of living a life of a recluse in the jungles, in the forest, in the mountains, lived and worked in society, guiding, serving, and uplifting communities. That tradition continues today with over 1,200 Swamis initiated by the Gunatit Satpurush, or the spiritually enlightened Guru. These Swamis, who have excelled academically, come from diverse backgrounds and countries, and yet dedicate their lives entirely not only to their own spiritual growth, but to the spiritual growth and betterment of society. In each episode, we'll sit down for a thoughtful conversation with one of these Swamis, exploring practical insights, ancient wisdom, and meaningful guidance for everyday life. Today, we're joined by Pujya Chaitanyamurtidas Swami. He lived in Dallas, Texas, and graduated summa cum laude from Southern Methodist University with a degree in computer science and philosophy. After teaching Swamis in a training seminary in Saharanpur, Gujarat, India, he currently looks after various outreach activities in BAPS North America. Having a background in the sciences, studying the Hindu scriptures extensively, and having traveled the entire world, he has a unique vantage point in answering some of life's most basic questions and challenges. It is that vantage point that is well documented through his thought-provoking oratory and talks. Swamiji, Jai Swaminarayan, Namaste.
Jai Swaminarayan, Namaste.
Thank you for joining us on our first episode of this podcast. How are you doing today?
Nice. Thank you for having me.
So I figured we might as well start with a very simple, basic question. What is the meaning of life?
That would require many conversations, but yeah.
So maybe we get to that in a few episodes, but I am only joking, but in reality only half joking. And the reason for that is I think it's a question we eventually do ask ourselves. And the reason for that is time, or the flow of time. Once we're done with school, we're joining the workforce, we get into our work and home routine, we're so busy and we realize that time just goes by. And there's so many things we want to achieve, whether that's progressing in our career, spending more time with our family, volunteering, learning a new skill, being a healthy person, or living a healthy lifestyle. There's so many things we want to achieve. Instead of feeling a level of satisfaction, we actually end up feeling stretched thin. So I guess it begs the question, how do I balance it all?
Yeah, so I think, Yogesh, it's a very important question that you're asking. It's age-old, and it is also, just as it is age-old and ancient, it is also just as relevant right now, and I'm sure it'll be in the future. But the analogy that you're asking is very important. You asked the question about how to actually balance time, right? And so you're assuming the analogy of balancing. And what I want to sort of elaborate on is that maybe that analogy can be changed or modified. And what I mean by that is that sometimes asking the right question is more important than just answering a question, right?
Very true, yes.
Throughout history, the better the question, the better the answer. Sometimes the questions have been wrong, and so the answers were never right or never completely accurate. So the right question is important. So the question of actually balancing time, I want to sort of change that into something more elaborate. And instead of balancing time, because what happens with balancing time is that you're assuming balance requires you to have it implies equality.
Yeah.
And so if you say balancing work, life, play, then it implies sort of equal time for all of that. But you know it's not practical, and you can't make that happen on a day-to-day life.
Correct.
And also balance implies wobbliness.
Okay.
If you balance, you're going to wobble. And so that's not stability either. So instead of that, maybe we can ask a better question of how to master life. Not balance life, but how to master it, mastery over life. And what I mean by that is that you have control of time and you can control things, although sometimes it's not in your control, but still you can master it to the sense that you are always in control. And that's the analogy I think that we can talk about today. instead of balancing time, mastering time and mastering life. And the reason I'm giving that analogy is I want to today, in today's talk, sort of sprinkle in incidents from someone that I know that has mastered life.
Okay.
Someone that you also know, and many people that around the world have known, not because he was my guru, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, and we've all seen his life, and I've seen it, and you've seen it, and many other people around the world have seen it, but he was able to actually master life, master time.
Okay.
And I want to take that analogy because if you think about it, here's one man in his entire lifespan, he only studied till the 5th grade in a small school in a village in India, in Padra. You probably haven't seen.
No, honestly, I haven't.
So it's a small place in the 5th grade. That person that's just studied that much can eventually go on to become a spiritual leader, but that's okay. But imagine what he created. 1,200 mandirs throughout the world. So that itself is an achievement, with Akshardhams, and
Absolutely.
we all know that. But it wasn't just that, right? He actually was able to actually travel throughout the world. 17,000 villages, towns, cities around the world, traveling every single place. Imagine in your life, how many places will you ever visit if you go on vacation?
Single digits.
Single digits, hundreds maybe.
Exactly.
Thousands. So he traveled. You can imagine the schedule with all the traveling. Meeting people. It wasn't just about giving lectures and going back home. 800,000 people he met around the world. And he wrote letters and kept in touch with them personally, one-on-one. Imagine what kind of life that would be.
Yeah.
And how would you manage that time?
Impossible.
Totally wobbly, totally unstable.
Yeah.
And yet we've seen him that he was completely stable and in control of his time and his life.
Correct.
And so that analogy or that example of Pramukh Swami Maharaj, I think gives us a good insight in how we can master life. And that's what I think we can use that throughout our talk today to sort of refer back to how he lived his life. So I think the analogy of balancing, I can give another analogy. Sometimes you say like life is like a juggling act.
Sure. I've heard that a lot, yes.
If you ever juggled, and you can probably juggle with 2 balls, that's easy. But the moment you add a third, there's constant tension.
Yes.
And so the moment you use that analogy, then you're going to have tension and stress. But if you take another analogy, the analogy of a dance, where things are always moving, but you're actually in control and you're actually enjoying it, that analogy is better. And so what Pramukh Swami Maharaj did in his life was actually a dance of time, or a dance of life.
Got it.
And that analogy is what I think we can refer to and talk about.
So you mentioned a lot of things that I actually do want us to be able to double click on and kind of go deeper into. But since you mentioned Pramukh Swami Maharaj, only the 5th grade in a village that I've never visited myself. And yet somehow, without going through all the self-help books, without, hearing other podcasts or other experts on how to managing time or how to mastering time, what was his secret? How was he able to master time?
Yeah, so if we want to use his analogy, I think, there are lots of facets that we can go deeper into it, but I think what he had in his life and what we can learn from it are basically 3 basic habits is what we can talk about.
Okay.
And it's important that I mention the word habit, because it wasn't something that he did consciously and he had to make effort to do. It was just a habit in his life.
Okay.
And that's what we can learn from. And so, for example, in your life or my life, we all have habits. I'm sure you have a habit that you do every day. Like what do you do every day without even thinking?
Showering.
Showering.
Yeah.
Eating.
Yeah.
Meals. You don't think about it, you just do it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So these 3 things that we'll talk about today, Pramukh Swami Maharaj did, and the great people of the world also did, and that's why they were successful in control of their life. So I'll talk about those 3 habits, and I think that can give us good insight on how we can also master our own life. So the first habit, I can refer to it as mastering perspective, becoming a master of perspective of life. The second habit is becoming a master of priorities. And it sounds easy, but we'll go deeper into that as well, because Pramukh Swami did that very well. And the third habit I think that we can also delve into deeper is becoming a master of energy, not just time.
All right.
And I think these 3 habits would basically form the crux of what Swami Pramukh Swami Maharaj happened to do in his life.
So I think, Swami, for us to be able to understand each one in a way that we can all comprehend, absorb, and understand, would it be okay if we do each one at a time versus trying to lump them? So I think you mentioned mastery of perspective is the first one. So how was Pramukh Swami Maharaj able to do that?
So I won't just talk about Pramukh Swami, I want to talk about in general, but Pramukh Swami Maharaj is an example of that. But what I mean by becoming a master of perspective is basically having a holistic vision of life, thinking about life in a big picture way.
Okay.
Not just minutely, and that's very important, and it has to become natural to us. And I think we can give the example of a war.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's not a good example to give, but still you can consider all the wars that happened throughout history. When someone's fighting a war, think about what's important in winning a war. So is it just mastering defense and becoming defensive, or is it mastering becoming offensive? Is it mastering strategy, or or having good morale with the troops?
Yeah.
If you think about it, everything is important to win a war.
You need all of that.
So there was a great general, a Chinese general in the 5th century BC, like 2,500 years ago. His name was Sun Tzu.
Okay.
He wrote a very influential book through history. It was called The Art of War.
Yes.
Probably heard of it. It's very famous. So although he wrote that book about war, those concepts have been applied in many different fields in the world afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. Even in sports and in any kind of competition.
Corporate world.
In the corporate world. Yes. And so the concept that he teaches is very important. That it's very easy to win a battle. That you can do small, simple things and focus on a certain aspect on offense or defense, and you can win a battle.
Okay.
But he said it very interesting that if you want to win a war, which is a long-term game, then everything is important. You have to think about, the terrain. Where are you fighting the war? You have to think about things like, your strategy, the weather. You have to think about the offense, the defense. You have to think about, he went really deep into this. You have to actually know yourself to be able to win a war. You have to also know the enemy. You have to also learn how to fight a war without even fighting a war. So the point being is that all these different perspectives are important when you want to win a war.
Okay.
The bigger picture. And so that analogy, I think, applies to life. That if you want to think about, for example, health, which in your body right now, or my body, anyone's body, if you want to be healthy, what is the definition of health? Is it having a healthy heart? Is that good enough?
Not good enough, but definitely
it's necessary.
Yes.
But what if your heart's healthy but your brain isn't? So is it just the brain and the heart, or is it also the kidney, the liver? And you get the point, right?
It seems to be all of it is necessary.
So all of that has to come together to become healthy.
Yeah.
And so my point here is becoming a master of perspective is think about the world or life as a holistic picture, and everything becoming important. So I think the way to put this would be, instead of learning about balancing life, I would put it the other way. The most important thing is to live a balanced life. To live a life that is wholesome, that is holistic. And I think that perspective, is the most important perspective to master first. Thinking about the big picture.
So I might need a little bit of help with that, Swami, because you mentioned rather than thinking about balancing life, we should live a balanced life. Now, is that just semantics? I know you threw in the word about a wholesome life. So what is the distinction or difference between balancing life versus living a balanced life, a wholesome life, as you mentioned?
Yeah, so the word wholesome meaning complete, holistic, the big picture, as we mentioned in the example of war. See, there are so many aspects of life, but everything's important. And if we neglect something, then ultimately what happens is in our trying to balance time, we neglect something and then something goes awry. And then I call it hollow victories.
Okay.
And what I mean by hollow victories is that, again, going back to the analogy of a war, that you can have a victory in a small part, but then it's hollow because you're missing out on the other parts.
Yeah.
So let's take the different aspects of life, if you will. So first of all, there's a physical aspect of our life, health.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to be healthy.
Yeah.
And so we can't neglect that in our life. You have to have that perspective as well. No matter how good you want to be in your career, you're in the law field, and you can be great in that, but you can't neglect your health, right?
Yeah.
You have to be healthy. So if you go back to the example of Pramukh Swami, he didn't just build mandirs.
Okay.
He also took care of his health. An aspect you probably don't see, but if you know his life, every day in the morning and evening he used to walking.
Wow.
In the evening after his walking, he did pranayam, he did simple yogasans and health, right? He ate a very healthy, wholesome meal, no junk food, obviously. So health was an important part of his life.
Okay.
And so that part can't be neglected. Otherwise, hollow victories. You can progress in your career, but if you're not healthy, then what's the point?
Okay.
So that has to become a part of your life. But it's not just that. You have to also develop intellectually in your field, or
Yes.
just generally in life. Become a student for life. There's so many new things to learn in your own field or even in the world, new skills. Things change all the time, and especially in the modern day when things are changing so quickly.
Yeah.
If we don't adapt and learn new things, then we get left behind. So it's important to develop intellectually. AI is coming. So are you aware? Do you know how to use it and ride the wave?
Yeah.
Because you have to develop our intellectual skills, learn new hobbies. That's important. But you can't just stop there. You also have to think about your own, leisurely life. It's not just about, all work and no play.
Yeah.
Makes Jack a very dull boy, right?
Yes.
So you have to think about that. So entertainment is important, leisure is important. You have to have fun, creativity, sport, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But can that help the other aspects of life? So let's not use that in a wasteful way. Financial aspect of life, you can't neglect that either. In Hinduism, we mentioned the four basic goals of life: dharma, arth, kam, and moksha.
Yes.
Arth is an important goal of life.
Yeah.
Arth meaning financial stability, not just stability, investing your money so that it's wisely used, and you can't neglect all of those things. So these are facets, and
Okay.
sometimes if we just focus on one thing and forget the others, then we don't live a very wholesome life.
Okay.
Another aspect that I think is extremely important is the social aspect of life.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be good in your career, you can be good in your in health, you can be healthy, you can have fun. But socially, how good are we in our family life, with our relatives, with our friends? Is that healthy?
Yeah.
That's very important. I'll just mention a very interesting study that happened many years ago. 1938 is when it started. It's probably the longest study of adult development that's ever been conducted.
Oh, really?
So it started in 1938,
Okay.
Harvard.
Yeah.
It's a study done by Harvard. And it's going on even today, I think 75 years later,
Oh, wow.
it's still going on. So the study is very simple. They studied 724 men in those days,
Okay.
following them through their life. And the question is very simple. What makes people happy and healthy? That's the question.
All right.
So they started by those 724 men, studied their life day to day. What did they do? What did they think? And it wasn't just simple studies of like questionnaire, how do you feel? They actually took blood tests and MRIs and all kinds of medical tests to see actually does it translate to being happy and healthy.
Yeah.
They studied their children and their children's children even today. So now that study includes 2,000 people.
Okay.
75 years of research and tens of thousands of pages of notes and research notes.
Yeah.
And conclusions even. And you know what they came up with at the end? The bottom line is very simple. Good relationships make people happy and healthy. Period.
Okay.
75 years of research.
Wow.
The bottom line is good relationships, social life, makes people happy and healthy. Period.
Okay.
And the second corollary that they came up with is that it's not just about the quantity of those relationships, it's also about the quality of those relationships. So how good are those? You don't need 500 friends on social media, for example. You just need 10 good friends and the good relationship. That's what they came up with. So the point being that it's very important for us to actually have a healthy social life. We can't neglect that. Otherwise, we have hollow victories again.
Okay.
Make $1 million and become, very well off. But if the social life isn't healthy, then ultimately we suffer. So that big picture perspective, that's what I'm talking about. So I think you get what I'm talking about so far.
I do. But I also have to admit, Swami, it seems like there's a lot. There's a lot of things that we have to do at the same time. And honestly, that makes it stressful in itself, realizing that I have to spend as much, or not as much time, but I have to focus on all these necessities, whether it's family, whether it's financially, whether it's socially, whether it's intellectually, spiritually. All these elements are there. And it seems like you're just suggesting, or not suggesting, but advocating that doing more is the way to go about doing it. Now, my brain works where I like to find shortcuts. So you mentioned socially makes us both happy and healthy. So does that mean if I'm social, I don't need to do the health stuff? Or, but yeah, it just seems like you're suggesting doing more leads to a balanced life. But isn't that a contradictory? How am I fitting all this in that
So I think it's very a logical question that follows from what I just said. But I think one more point has to be added to make it even more complex.
Okay.
So we mentioned the basic aspects of life, the health, the social life, the financial life, which is everyone has to follow.
Sure.
For most people, that would be good enough.
Yeah.
If you balance those aspects, they'll be pretty happy in general, right? But there's one aspect that we can't neglect, and it's also a very important aspect of life, is the spiritual aspect of life, which people don't see all the time, but that is an aspect that can't be neglected.
Okay.
And that's what I mean by the big perspective. It's not just about the 70, 80, 90 years that we are on this earth. The bigger picture of that, what's after that, and what's all this for, and what's the purpose? If that's not there, it's hollow. And so the spiritual aspect, and if you think about it just superficially, even forget afterlife or that big of a picture.
Sure.
What kind of person does the world need? I mean, before we talk about what the world needs, what kind of the person does the world not need? I think you can probably agree that the world doesn't need people that are very egotistical.
Yes.
Or people that are very impatient.
Mm-hmm.
Or people that are very, hateful, revengeful, revenge-minded. People that always get in fights, that are always angry. They can't make good decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It makes logical. I mean, the whole world will not need those kind of people. Correct. So the contrast of that, what kind of person does the world need?
Egoless.
People that are humble, selfless, think about others, help others, peaceful, peace-loving, honest. So my question then is, where do you learn those things? And what makes you peaceful? What makes you peace-loving? What makes you humble? Where will you get that? We're just thinking about financial gains and social gains.
Yeah.
And so that aspect of spirituality is also a perspective that can't be neglected in the big picture. Otherwise, it won't be complete.
Okay.
And so I mean, having that big picture perspective means having that as well. And I think that can't be neglected.
So again, how do we then do all of this with the extra element of spirituality?
So now you have one more. You have one more element now.
Yes, exactly.
So I think before we address that, and I think the later part of the talk today will also address that problem. Of course, it makes sense. You have now even more things to do, and so how can you fit it all in? But I think one corollary to this talk about thinking about the big picture perspective is that it's very important that when we think about the big picture perspective of things, we end up playing the long game.
Okay.
Which is very important, the long game. If you think in terms of sports, I know you're a football fan.
Yes.
And Giants, maybe, I'm not sure.
Yes, I'm assuming since you were in Dallas, Cowboys, perhaps.
Yeah, anyway, so sports, football, what does a player think about? A good player thinks about every single play and making that play good.
Yes.
But what does a good coach think about? They don't think about every single play. they think about making the game successful. So forget one play here and there, but how do I win the game?
Yeah.
That's what a good coach will do. But what would a great coach do? They wouldn't think about a play or just one game. How do I win the season
Yeah.
and the Super Bowl, the championship, right? So that's the bigger perspective that a great coach would think about.
Okay.
Go one step further, what would a legendary coach think about? Legendary,
Dynasty.
the legend. Dynasty, right?
Yeah.
It's not about just one season or one play or one game. How do I build a team that makes things a dynasty in the long run? And so that, I think that long-term perspective, the holistic perspective of life is the first thing.
Okay.
So Pramukh Swami Maharaj, he naturally, it was, again, I mentioned in the very beginning, it has to be a habit. And he had that habit where he thought about everything. Everything was important, and he made it work. And that's why, if you think about it, that's why he was actually happy and you know, a very content life, because he did everything.
So you mentioned how, and I'm sure we'll get to it hopefully soon, because I'm still wondering how to balance it all, or not to balance, how to be balanced. So I'm beginning to understand what you mean, that we need to have more of a larger perspective of life and not look at it necessarily in 1 day span or even 1 month, but you're looking at years, decades, a lifetime. But still, it seems very difficult to figure out how and when to do the financial with the intellectual, with the family, with the social, with the spiritual. So again, how am I mastering that aspect of doing all those things that are still necessary to a wholesome life?
Yeah, so I think that you mentioned that this is still a problem, that how do I fit all this into my 24-hour day? But again, that was just the first habit, that we have to think about the big picture, and that makes things balanced, and that becomes a complete life. But the second habit is just as important, and that is basically becoming a master of priorities. If you want to master life, then you also have to become a master of priorities. And what I mean by that is that, choosing the vital few over the trivial many. There are many,
explain that?
So there are many trivial things that we do in life, but what is the vital few that gives us the most of life? And ultimately, we have to become master decision makers.
Okay.
And I think one important thing that we can sort of elaborate on is that science tells us right now that there are hundreds of decisions we make throughout a day, maybe even thousands, right? Some of the decisions that you've already taken and everyone has taken, they're called macro decisions.
Okay.
Macro decisions meaning when you were in school, you chose a career. Mm-hmm. That was major because that decided your whole path in life, right? Sure. And now you're a lawyer. Other decisions, macro decisions you made is like careers. You eventually got a job. Where do you take the job? Your family, marriage. Those are macro decisions.
Yeah.
And they're few in all of life. But there are thousands of micro decisions that we make throughout the day and throughout our life that we don't think about.
Okay.
Micro decisions. When you woke up in the morning today, you had a choice to hit a snooze button or not.
Yes.
And so that is a decision. We don't think about it. But do I wake up? Do I stay asleep? When you go to the shower, decisions of what do you do? What do you think about? When you eat your breakfast, what do you eat? Is it cereal? Is it something else?
Okay.
What do you eat? What do you dress? See, today, when you wore your clothes, what did you put on? So
got it. So those are the micro decisions that we're constantly making in a day.
The micro decisions, and they go on throughout the day, and we're making a lot of them, and we don't think about them. But what happens is the more and more of those micro decisions that we have to make during the day, we experience what is known as decision fatigue.
Yes.
You don't know it, you don't think about it, but the more choices we have, which nowadays we have more and more choices in life, we have to decide more, and the more decisions we make, we have decision fatigue, and we don't realize it, but that's what's giving us the imbalance, and that's what's giving us the stress, and that's what's causing the problems. So ultimately, becoming a master decision maker is very important.
So I feel like we're going in a rabbit hole and we're asking more questions, but I'm assuming this will lead to somewhere. But you just mentioned micro decisions or being a better decision maker. I understand it totally makes sense that the more choices you have, I'll give a silly example. If we're at a restaurant, all of a sudden, if there's 40 items you could eat versus 2, it's much easier to decide on the 2 versus when you have 40, you're not sure what to do. And so, yes, I could realize how that could snowball, that when you're having just too many options, too many choices, too many decisions to make, that can lead to stress, fatigue, discomfort, whatever you want to call it. So then how am I becoming what do I need to do to become a better decision maker, more decisive decision maker, so I'm not fatigued by making constant decisions throughout the day?
Yeah, so I think the better decision makers are the people that choose the vital few over the trivial many. So there's a very well-known principle in today's world called Pareto's principle.
Okay, I've not heard of it, so I can.
Yeah, so the name is given by a man named Vilfredo Pareto.
Okay.
Who was an Italian economist, and he noticed something very interesting in Italy at that time. He noticed that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the people.
Okay.
And that concept became known as Pareto's principle. But the concept eventually was not applied just to economics and land in Italy, but to a lot of other things. It's today applied to things like quality control and computing and even research and many things.
Okay.
The concept's very simple, that if 20% of your effort gives you 80% of the results, then why not focus on that 20%? If you happen to be a businessman and 20% of your products give you 80% of the revenue, then why not focus on the 20% and make that better and better?
Okay.
That concept is known as Pareto's principle, and I think that's what we can ultimately apply to our own life. That of all those things we have to do all throughout life, and all those big perspective things we talked about, they're all important.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that everything has to happen at the same time.
Correct.
And so at any given point in your life, in any given point in a day, what are the 20% or 80-20 is just a number. It could be 90-10. It's even more powerful. What are the 10% of things that you can do that give you 90% result? If there's something like that, then shouldn't you focus more time and more energy in that? If you use that as a guiding habit, make that a habit in life, then don't you think that we'd all become much, much more productive and much more effective? Because now you're doing things that are relevant and give you more impact in life. And so if that becomes your guiding light and guiding principle, then I think that can help us balance and make better decisions. So that's a very important, I think, concept to keep in mind.
So then how do we go about actually understanding what is the 10%, that 20% that gives us the most bang for your buck, if you will? That if I devote my time to these things versus these other trivial matters, how do I go about making those decisions, or how do I come about realizing what fits in this bucket of the optimal things to do, and this bucket which I'm not going to get much mileage from it?
Yeah, so I think it's a valid question that ultimately we have to think about it. That okay, of all the things we're doing in life, what are the things that are the most impactful? And it has to be a repetitive question. It doesn't mean the same thing will apply every day. Or in every stage of life. It'll be different things at different times, right? Okay. If you're a student, then of course education and spending more time on that and not on financial aspect makes sense at that time. That'll give you the maximum results. And there have been so many tests on this that and when a student focuses on his studies and not about other things that he doesn't need to worry about at that time, then of course he'll be more successful in careers in the future. So at any given stage, what is it that requires that 20% of your time?
Okay.
So it requires thought, and requires repetitive thinking of the same thing. But it's like I said, it's a habit. If we continually make that our life, okay, for example, exercise. Are we sure that 30 minutes that we can spend in the day will give you a lot of benefit? Then why not spend that 30 minutes or 20 minutes? But even in that, you would think that, okay, what is the things I could do in that 30 minutes that'll give you the maximum bang for the buck?
Yeah.
Which are the exercises I need? Everyone will have different needs.
Got it.
And that habit keeps us impactful and effective. That's, I think, what I meant to say by becoming master of priorities.
Okay.
But there's one more thing I think that we can all do that helps us become master of priorities.
All right.
And I think that's a very universal and ageless thing. Is basically just simplifying life.
Okay.
If you think about all those micro decisions that we talked about,
Yes.
that make us fatigued, that we don't think about it, it makes us tense, and we think, oh, Swami, we have to do so many things in life, and we're stressed. And well, a lot of those things, if you think about it, is because we made life so complex and complicated unnecessarily. Simplify life. A habit of constantly simplifying, making life more simple as we go through time. Because again, the more the brain has to do and more the brain has to think about, the more fatigue it's going to get. Example, I'm going to ask you, so how many shoes do you have in your closet at home?
Hopefully this is not too embarrassing, but probably in the 20 to 30 range, something like that.
The number can vary.
Yeah.
But so I'm sure you have shoes or slippers or sandals or something for indoors. You have something for outdoors, and in your backyard you wear maybe something different. Then you have your dress shoes that you would wear when you go outside. You have business shoes, or when you go for business meetings. You have sneakers when you go walking. You go running, and different variations of them, and different colors. And okay, so that's fine. And now you've become accustomed to wearing shoes all the time. And by the way, someone told me something very interesting. Swami, you should try barefoot therapy.
Oh, okay.
So I said, what's that? And he said, sit barefoot and walk barefoot, and it's good therapy. Well, we were born barefoot. But shoes. So you need shoes. But the point here is you have so many pairs of shoes. Now you become accustomed to the shoes. Now when you have to go outside on a business trip somewhere, now you have to think about shoes to pack. Not just the simple shoes that you're wearing, but now shoes to pack when you go there. And when you have shoes to pack, then now you need a bigger bag to take those shoes in. And when you have the bigger bag, then you have to go to the check-in. You have to check in the bag. And when you go to check in the bag, you have to leave a little bit early. And so because you left early, you forgot to, say goodbye to your kids.
Effect potentially.
And because you forgot to say goodbye to your kids, your wife gets angry at you and you get angry at her. And all these things happen. Why? Shoes. So you see, those 20 pairs of shoes are more expensive than you think.
Okay.
Simplicity, simplify. I'm not saying don't wear shoes, obviously, but if you think about, again, going back to the example of Pramukh Swami, and many great people of the world, simplicity is what made them so effective.
Okay.
They were able to live a very simple life and so do much more because of that. Pramukh Swami Maharaj had no fashion. For him, there were only 2 pairs of clothes.
Yeah.
He wore one day and then the other set next day. Fashion's out of his life, so he doesn't have to worry about what to pack. He had no money. So there's no bank account. There's nothing to worry about in terms of financial everything. So that saved a lot of time.
Yeah.
He had no house. So there's nothing to worry about in terms of house and everything. And hundreds of different simplistic things that he did that made his life so manageable because he got rid of all the extras in life. So I'm not saying that you become a monk.
You are selling the Swami life pretty well right now, Swami.
But live a simple life, and as simple as we can get, that makes us better prioritizers, because now you have to prioritize more because you have less things to do in terms of the complexities of life, and it makes us better managers of time. So I think that's something that we actually can do. So becoming a master of priorities, I think these 2 things are very basic things we can do. Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule, 90-10, whatever, and live a simpler life. I think that makes us a much better master of our time in our life.
And I think, Swami, to your point, you just mentioned simplicity. I think it was either Mark Zuckerberg or whether it was Steve Jobs. Everyone always said they wear the same thing. And I think one time they were asked the question, why are you wearing the same jeans and T-shirt? And they're like, I have other things to prioritize or other things to do. And so why, to your point, make these trivial decisions that are spending my time, my energy, which brings me to the fact of energy. It seems like even if we were to understand the wholesome picture or the whole picture, knowing that life is not just one day, it's a whole lifetime, then prioritizing, knowing what to put that 20% in so you maximize your result versus the other 80, which might not be as fruitful. It still seems like energy is a requirement in all of this. And it seems actually tiring still to think that I have to always be on. If I'm properly putting my energy in that 20%, only then will I get that 80% result that you gave of the analogy before. So how do we now think of energy in the equation that you previously gave of the 3 things that we need to make into a habit? How does energy fit into all of this?
Yeah, so I think, again, the question we're asking here is how do we manage time?
Yes.
And that's where, again, the analogy or the example of managing time, I think we can flip that on the side or somewhere and say, instead of managing time, the better question to ask is how do we manage our energy?
Okay.
Because more important than time is energy.
Yes.
It's not, you don't need more hours in the day, because you're not going to get more hours in the day.
Yeah.
How can you get more energy in your hours?
Okay.
That's the question that we should be asking, because throughout our life is fixed. There's no more hours in the day and whatever our lifespan is. But how can you pack more into that so you can become more effective and more more impactful to the world?
Yeah.
So I think one thing that we can do to increase our energy throughout life is I call it increasing our dynamic range.
Okay.
It's a technical term, and all objects in the world have a dynamic range. So if you think about the TV set you have in your home, nowadays they have this term called high dynamic range TVs.
Okay.
And HDR. So what does that actually mean? It's a nice term. What it actually means is that the TV has a greater dynamic range of colors. The reds are redder, the blacks are blacker, the white is whiter, and the greens are greener, and there's a whole more color spectrum that it displays, and that makes it a better TV.
Okay.
Microphones have a dynamic range. What is the lowest low it can pick up, the highest high it can pick up, and that's called dynamic range.
Got it.
And so do our bodies. What's the dynamic range of our body? Why do you exercise? You're giving yourself pain every day by exercising. Why? Because you want to increase your dynamic range, that when you strain yourself for that 30 minutes in the day, you can do a lot more throughout your life, because now your muscles are stretching and becoming more dynamic. The range is increasing.
Got it.
And so that's exercise. Then if you go one step further, how much is the dynamic range of our emotions? That needs to be considered. What drains our energy in our days? Emotions.
Yes.
And so what's the dynamic range of emotions? How much can we take? Sometimes when people become abusive and people become, critical to us, then we sort of, wilt like a flower would wilt.
Absolutely.
But that's draining our energy.
Yeah.
How much can we take? So we have to learn to increase our emotional dynamic range as well. And I think one formula that Yogi Ji Maharaj, who was Pramukh Sai Maharaj's guru, he gave a very simple formula for increasing dynamic range. And it was in simple Gujarati. He didn't have like great flowery words, but in simple Gujarati, he said, Jehu tehu jem tem jyata chalavi levu.
Which means?
So basically, make do with whatever you get whenever you get it, and with whoever you get.
Okay.
Make do. Learn to tolerate, learn to accept, and use that positively is what he talked about. And so the dynamic range, again, can we make our bodies and our minds so that we can tolerate a little bit more? Not obviously to too much extremes, but if you have a pillow, which you have in your rooms, but you probably have different types of pillows, right? You have pillows for the side sleeper, you have pillows for the back sleepers, and the different types of sleepers. You have a neck pillow for traveling, again, which is all fine. But if you don't get those pillows, then you're gonna have problems. So it's not like saying don't use pillows, but can we make do with less and not being so picky about things? And I think that's part of spirituality. It trains us to be more dynamic, more accepting, and let go, let things be, and make do with what you get. And then you can do a lot more when you don't get it.
Okay.
And that's increasing our energy, in being more capable to increase our dynamic range and being able to do more emotionally, and also being able to work with anyone, anytime, anywhere. And that's why Pramukh Swami, again, his life, he had extremely high dynamic range.
Okay.
And of course, spiritual life helps to in all of that.
Yeah.
And that's why it's necessary. So I think increasing our dynamic range is one way that we can increase our energy. So
is it a correct way of also understanding that, as you mentioned earlier, simplifying our life by being more tolerant, you're essentially simplifying your ways that you're going to react to someone doing something to you. So if someone gets angry at you, but if you're like, okay, you know what, that's fine, I'll leave this situation, you're not wasting your energy because you're now just simplifying what your responses will be to that. So you're just tolerating the situation. So is that really the essence of maintaining our energy, or to maximizing our energy, if you will, just to tolerate? Is that the only thing?
So that's one aspect, definitely. That tolerate sounds like a very negative word. I have to tolerate, and so it is in a sense, but we don't realize it, that when you're tolerating the pain, when you're exercising, you're tolerating, but it's making you stronger overall.
Correct.
In the same way, when you think about emotional tolerance, it's making us stronger when we actually tolerate for a while. We don't think about it that way. But so that's one very important aspect that we should understand and make it a habit of.
That makes sense, yeah.
So that helps us become a master of energy.
Okay.
But the other way of adding energy to our life is very, again, age-old. We know about it, but we just can't do it sometimes. It's basically, I call it choosing light over darkness. Diwali, the standard theme we always use is, light over darkness. And it's true, and it's so effective. And the analogy is very simple. Always choosing positivity and positive mindset over the darker, negative mindset. And that gives us a lot of energy, always being positive about things. It requires a spiritual element as well to become eternally positive about everything. But that makes us so much more energetic.
So the analogy of looking at a glass half full versus looking at it half empty.
And it's very simple. We already know that analogy.
Yeah.
But when the time comes, we always tend to choose the negative. What if this will happen? What is it? And that makes the energy drain from us. Always, even if times are very dark and seem hopeless, to just even verbally be positive.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of something that I heard very recently. You know about SpaceX and these rockets that they sent to space. When they fail, and you've seen them crash, the general terminology that we would use for a rocket crashing is these rockets crashed.
Yes.
And the terminology that SpaceX chooses to have for that is not that. And this is actually in their manuals. When a SpaceX rocket crashes, it doesn't crash. It has what is known as a rapid unscheduled disassembly.
Oh, okay, that's a mouthful, but...
Rapid unscheduled disassembly. Our rocket actually disassembled. It disassembled rapidly, and it was unscheduled.
Okay.
But it didn't crash.
It's a nice way to put in crash. Yes.
So I guess it's the same thing, but it's just basically spinning it positively and making things sound better, and so then you're going to become more positive. Of course, it doesn't apply to everything, but if you have that positive mindset, it'll definitely make us more creative to find solution to things, as opposed to having a negative mindset. Another very classic example that's been told in many stories and movies in the world even is Apollo 13.
Yeah.
The story is very well known that, first of all, it was a 13, so is it unlucky or not? And it was a chance for sort of science to slap superstition on the face. 13, what does that mean to science, right? But, it had a problem. Houston, we have a problem. They had basically oxygen tank exploded in space and created literally a hole in the spaceship.
Wow.
And so there was no hope. It was going to be, they were going to die, all three astronauts. Now, on the ground in Houston, the director of mission control, sort of whoever controlled the mission, he had one way of looking at it. And what he said at that time is, I think this is going to be the worst disaster that NASA has ever faced because, of course, 3 people dying in space.
Yeah.
So that was one perspective. But the flight director, another person, he had another perspective. He said, I beg to differ, sir. I think this is going to be our finest hour.
Wow.
To a different perspective. And what happened because of that finest hour mindset? They said, okay, let's get together, and failure is not an option anymore. What can we do creatively? Every single creative aspects we can get our minds on. Everyone worked together, scientists working around the clock, finding creative solutions to whatever they had in space. How can you make duct tape work for you? You can't use duct tape and save a spaceship, but they did.
Wow.
They were able to use like simple apparatuses that they had up there, and they made tweaks and made everything work. Why? And ultimately they survived and they lived, and the story has been told throughout history. They survived because one person or a group of people had a positive mindset, and it created creative avenues and energy. And that, I think, is a very important aspect of mastering and to create energy. So it's not just about time, but what we do with the time we have. If we can have that positive mindset, and that gives us the positive energy, I think it'll be very important for us to a tool to help us master our life.
So Swami, you mentioned the three elements of the habit that Brahma Swami Maharaj had, whether it was mastery of perspective, mastery of priorities, and mastery of energy. And whether we admit it or not, I think these are some things that we generally may have come across, whether through reading self-help books, social media, reading other manuals, mentors, etc. We've kind of have heard in different forms, maybe not in a concise way like this, that these are the elements to mastering time. But how do we actually apply it? I mean, in theory, this all makes sense, and you gave us great examples of how to actually understand it. But how do we go about applying this to our day-to-day life?
Yeah, so ultimately the application is the hardest part, right?
Yes.
It's all good in theory, but how do we make that work when we actually face these issues? And I think one important aspect to add to all of this is that when we're talking about the word mastery requires a master.
Okay.
You can't. We can't do it alone. If you want to master the art of playing a piano, and you want to be a master of the skill, then you need a master that teaches you that skill, no matter how good you are and skilled you are. And in the same way, it requires a master. So we always need motivation, inspiration throughout our life. Even though we know these skills, we always need motivation. Yeah. We'll always need course correction. We'll be off course. Everything won't be right. And so that course correction, that guidance, the motivation, the inspiration, whatever we want to call it, it ultimately comes from a source, a positive peer group, and what we call in our BAPS terminology, satsang, a satpurush. You need someone that's not just fighting battles. You need someone that's actually winning wars. If you go back to the analogy, right? Yeah. The whole world is basically fighting battles, and so keeping company there, which is necessary, is not going to help us throughout this big picture perspective of everything. You need someone that's actually won the war, that's actually has these perspectives in their life, and keeping company with them, keeping their association, talking to them, learning from them. I think that's a very important aspect to help us implement. I'll give you one analogy or example from, again, going back to Pramukh Swami Maharaj's life and how he guided in this manner, is that in 2005, Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Sarampur in India, and one of our senior devotees, his name was Vyomesh Joshi. He was a senior vice president of the printing division of Hewlett-Packard at that time. It was a very high-level post. And at that time, Hewlett-Packard and Compaq were merging, and they had merged, and it was a very major merger in the corporate world at that time. And so Vyomesh Joshi went to Sarampur with some of the new executives that were on their board and their leadership to meet Pramukh Swami and to get their blessings, because the merger has just happened. And then they were in a small room in Pramukh Swami's room in Sarampur, and Vyomesh introduced everyone, and they were obviously in the company of a Hindu monk for the first time. But they asked a very simple question, that Swamiji, here we have a merger. How can you help us and give us guidance and wisdom in our life? And so everyone's thinking, what is a monk, a Hindu monk? What do you tell a merger of two big corporations? Yes. And you know what Pramukh Swami Maharaj said? He said, you're very big companies, you're merging, but don't neglect the people in your life or in your companies. They're people that the merger is major, but if you give them a spiritual element in their life somehow, then they'll become better people. They won't work just for money. They'll become more honest, more giving, more caring. They'll become better team members. And that spiritual element, if you add that, then I think they'll become better people and your merger will become very successful. Then Swamiji laughed on the side and he told the other Swami that one solution for all problems, spirituality.
Got it.
So, and that's by the way is the exact same example or advice that Pramukh Swami gave Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam.
Okay.
He approached Pramukh Swami with a very major question that Swamiji, I'm developing a plan for India, a country of 1 billion, more than 1 billion people, and how to make India not a developing a country, but a developed country.
Okay.
And he listed the 5 major aspects that he thought of: health and education and infrastructure and technology and science, and they were all important.
Yeah.
And Swamiji heard all of that, and then at the end of the day, he said that don't neglect the spiritual backbone that has always, upheld our country for so many years. And that sort of opened Dr. Kalam's eyes, and he actually wrote a book on it. But that is what Pramukh Sai Maharaj gave to the world, that we can't neglect that, because that will help us glue everything together.
Okay.
And keep these perspectives that we talked about, these 3 major habits. It'll keep reminding us. So we need that master that can keep reminding us of these things. And I think if we have that in our life, then we can master these habits.
So Swami, you helped us understand the theory, the application of it, and how while we're trying to master ourselves in our lives, the perspective, the priorities, and mastering energy, having that overlay of spirituality through a master who's done it himself and shows us the way. Is there anything else that is part of that equation that we need to understand before we end today's episode?
No, I think that the bottom line is that life is not very long, if you think about it. It is long in one sense, but it's not very long in another sense. But we can do a lot in life if we master these habits. And again, Pramukh Sai Maharaj is an example that we gave, that we have 1 million things to do in life. But why stop at 1 million? Why can't we do 2 million or 10 million? If we master these habits, we can, which Pramukh Sai showed us, that you can do so many things in life in that same lifespan, and not just doing 10 million things, but making those 10 million things impactful and beneficial to the world. And so all these aspects working together, I think can make a very impactful life. And that's what the spirituality or any aspect that we talked about today is beneficial for. It not only makes us better people and we can do more in life, but I think it makes the world a better place. And I think that's the most important lesson that we can learn from what we talked about today.
I don't think there's anything else that I could add to that. Thank you, Swamiji, for that great talk on how we could live a balanced life versus trying to balance life. Thank you to our listeners for joining us on our first episode. If you liked today's conversation, please give a like. If you have any ideas of what you would like to hear in the future, please leave some comments and definitely subscribe so you don't miss any of the future episodes that will be coming on the BAPS Better Living channel. With that, thank you, Swamiji. Thank you, everyone. Namaste and Jai Swaminarayan.
Namaste.